Well, a warm welcome back to the Uxbridge FM History Show. And, as usual, Ken Pearce is here with another story, and this one is entitled When Christmas Was Banned. Intriguing.
Yes. Well, it's difficult to believe today there was a period in our history when the celebration of Christmas was banned. We have to go back about 350 years to the period of the English Civil War. That sad episode in our national story where even families were divided over support for the two sides. Who should rule this country, the king or Parliament? The Royalists, of course, supported King Charles I. Their opponents, weary of what they believed to be his hopelessly inadequate measures, wanted power for Parliament. But the dispute was religious as well as political. Generally speaking, the King's supporters were the Church of England, its bishops and its priests. It had ceremonies, church ornaments, robed clergy. But the parliamentary side, there was a strong Puritan element which stressed the authority of the Bible rather than church leaders, which objected to religious statues and ornaments, which disliked even the robe or surplice worn by the local priest, because the Puritans looked for simple services with preaching from the Bible as the main element. On the whole, it appears that this area of the country supported Parliament, and certainly Uxbridge became a garrison town for Cromwell's army. Parties of soldiers were often to be seen on the London to Oxford road, passing through Hillingdon and Uxbridge. A letter from one of those Roundhead soldiers, Nehemiah Wharton, survives. In it, he writes, in 1642, on August the 10th, towards evening, our regiment marched to Uxbridge, but I was left behind with 30 men to bring up the ammunition. The next morning, Thursday, we marched towards Uxbridge, and at Hillingdon, the communion rails already gone, we got the surplice and tore it up into handkerchiefs, and one of our soldiers wore the rest of it to go to Uxbridge. And this day the communion rails in Uxbridge had been removed, and with the service book were burned. So you see, some damage was done in the parish churches in Hillingdon and Uxbridge, and in particular the altar rails were wrenched out and destroyed. Hezekiah Woodwards, a Puritan writer, was living in Uxbridge at this time, and he produced a pamphlet, part of which attacks the traditional Christmas celebrations in rather old-fashioned language, but anyway, this is what he wrote. Christmas Day is the old heathen fasting day in honour to Saturn, their idol god. It's the papists' massing day, the profane man's ranting day, the superstitious man's idol day, IDOL, the multitude's idle day, IDLE, Satan's working day, the true Christian man's fasting day. We are persuaded that no one thing hindereth the gospel work all the year long, than doth the observation of that day once a year. Well, there's a very forthright attack on the traditional Christmas celebrations. John Evelyn, who lived in London, wrote in his diary on Christmas Day 1653, Christmas Day, no sermon anywhere, no church being permitted to open, so observed it myself at home. By 1657, 4 years later, things were a little easier, so here's John Evelyn again. I went to London with my wife to celebrate Christmas Day, and Mr. Gunning preached in Exeter Chapel off the Strand. When the sermon was over, as he was giving us the Holy Sacrament, the chapel was surrounded with soldiers, and all the communicants and assembly surprised. As we went up to receive the sacrament, they held their muskets against us, as if they would have shot us at the altar, but yet allowed us to finish the office of communion, as perhaps not having instructions what to do in case they found us in that action. Nothing serious seems to have happened to those worshippers after this show of force. In 1658, Cromwell died, and the power of Parliament and the Commonwealth faded rapidly. In May of the following year, King Charles II, who had been living in exile in France, came back to London. And so the monarchy was restored and things got back to normal again. And the celebration of Christmas returned too, someone with great relief composed this verse. Now thanks to God for Charles' return, whose absence made old Christmas mourn. For then one scarcely did it know whether it Christmas was or no.
Thanks, Ken. That's a proper bit of history there, going back to 1500s. Thank you very much. That's great.
My turn.